to internet.
I've
Been having a fun time with that all week last week. It's always something, right?
out delivering pizza or breakfast. Wow, I read people as pizzas. I guess I am tired mentally. This is my favorite time
People's
to write, though.
breakfast.
My favorite time to write is actually when I'm mentally fatigued because there's not a lot of filters. It just comes out.
There, I can turn you up like that.
I dig it.
Whatever.
Whatever, dude.
Good. You want some music? Should we do this?
You want to just jump right in?
I suppose we've already been talking for a bit.
I was gonna say, let's just hit it. I'm
Okay.
dotting.
Me too.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. This is Dan Podcast, part of the 1517 Podcast Network. And as always, we are your hosts, Christopher Gillespie.
Chilling and willing, maxing and relaxing.
And
Easter
I am
Monday.
Donovan Riley with my chocolate-covered espresso beans and my lemon water.
So you're ready to go.
I'm good to go. Today, we are going to go back to Simone Weil because, well, she's fun. And I had a lot of fun reading her over the weekend because I ordered her book. And if you want to, you can go read the wiki on her. It's actually exhaustive in a good way. It goes deep on her personal life and biography.
Okay.
That's all I can
And we
say
lost
about
your
that.
sound again.
She did a lot in a very short amount of time. But she was also, in my opinion, wildly realistic.
Hmm.
Like Lord Byron went to Greece to fight in a revolution because he just needed one. Had nothing to do with him. He had no investment in it, no relatives, no cause. He needed to participate in something bigger than himself. He needed that. So he went to suffer the consequences. But Simone was similar in the sense of, this is my favorite story actually. So she goes in order to participate in the Spanish Civil War, right? But she's so nearsighted and clumsy that the soldiers wouldn't allow her to go on patrols with her because they were afraid that she was going to shoot them in the back.
Okay.
Because they only see people as lumps, like blobs, right? So she accidentally ended up burning herself by shooting a pot of boiling water, and then stumbled into a fire and hurt herself a second time. So that her parents, who had moved with her to Spain in order to keep an eye on her because they were convinced she was going to hurt herself. So she kept insisting that she go on these patrols with these soldiers, and they just like, no, you can't. And if you do, you're not allowed to carry a gun.
Hmm.
So she's a fascinating character, really. She's almost like a Don Quixote in a certain sense, and that's kind of like a Lord Byron, like I said, in a certain sense. And yet there's a certain, I don't know. I respect her at that time in particular to be a woman in that era and just get after it. Do I sound quiet to everyone else? Look at that.
Yeah, you got really quiet all of a sudden again.
Oh man. Just
Hold on a second.
Gillespie,
Go ahead and quit
quit.
mute what do you call it? Where do you have it on your Zoom?
I just turned it up to 8.
That's probably too high.
Yeah.
It's not Zoom. Quit do you have messages open? If you maybe quit that.
Okay, that's done. That's out.
Okay. I tried a few things on this end, but I can't get you louder.
Yes.
Yeah, it was all because I did this remote desktop into your computer and it goofed you up.
Let's shut Spotify off. Let's shut everything off that I don't need.
Let's see.
I don't really have anything open other than audio hijack.
Go to in the streaming window here. Go to your mic settings. And like change which mic, and then come back to the Zoom.
Okay.
There, we switched to HDAU webcam. Super poppin'.
That's really loud.
Yep.
Okay.
Back
No,
to Zoom, and we are super quiet.
that's right.
So, cancellation. Do you want me off stereo?
It doesn't matter.
Okay, how about echo?
You don't need it to be in stereo. Turn off the echo cancellation.
That's off. How about automatically adjust mic volume?
Yeah, I have that on mine. It works fine.
My mic volume is at half.
I'm really loud, I'm sure.
You're good.
Huh.
So that's adjusted.
Trying to think. What else could you do? Why don't you leave the kick you and then you can come back? Haha.
That good?
You're nice. Oh, yeah. No,
Okay.
you're good. So,
right.
Simone.
There we go. Simone Weil. And I'm recording, so that's good too. All right, so you just chop that middle part out. So anyway, Simone's an interesting cat. Like I said, if you want to check her out, go check out the wiki on it. I don't agree with a lot of what she writes, but yet I really appreciate the fact that she's a wordsmith. She chooses her words carefully. And when it comes to idolatry and evil, she is really in the pocket, I think.
Good. Well, I wanted to talk about idolatry at some point anyway.
Well, here we are.
Well, because we, like you preached on fear yesterday, I've been thinking quite a bit about fear. I looked it up in the dictionary this morning, Oxford English, and the archaic use of fear is reverence, but that's no longer used. Well,
Right.
but it's used all over the place in the scriptures.
Yeah.
Right? The fear of God, right?
Yeah.
It's like, yes, it's fear of judgment, but it's not just fear of judgment, right? It's also that healthy, I'm trying to find a synonym. Fear, reverence, what would be another word? To say where you
Actually,
listen to him and you trust him.
The only analogy I've ever thought of that's adequate is just the way that my children look at me and
Oh, that's
interface
good.
with me, which
Oh,
is
that's good. I like
they
that.
do fear me, but they fear losing my confidence in them. They fear losing my sense of I'm proud of you. So the worst thing that I could say to one of my children is that I'm not proud of them, or that they've done something that causes me to say I'm not proud of what you've done. Because their reverence for me is such that they know I'm not a god. They know that I'm not superhuman. But in their eyes, I am, because I'm their father.
Well, and that's why this archaic use of fear, I've seen the way that people, if you want to do that archaic reverent fear, we have that for certain authorities outside of God, in not a healthy way,
Right.
right? And it ends up pointing towards a kind of idolatry where,
Almost like phobia, like a phobos type
well,
of fear.
it's when a phobia becomes a god.
Right. Well, I think that's when it becomes a god, is when something becomes phobic, because now you're no longer rational. It's all emotional.
Oh yeah, I
So
had a
rather
funny,
than revere something that you fear, revere in the sense of, well, I don't want to disappoint God. I don't want my Father in heaven to say to me, you have turned your back on the cross, or you have pushed aside my gift of grace to you, and this has hurt our relationship. And I think that's key, right? Is that with your children, their greatest fear is that the relationship between themselves and you is fractured.
so it's that fear of loss of relationship. That's
Right.
That's mutual trust and
Yeah.
yeah,
And respect
okay.
and
Yeah.
love, but also the sense of I look to you as a kind of compass. And so without that, I'm lost. It's like I talk about, I got baptized when I was 28. So all the times I tried to commit suicide, before that, had I succeeded, there's a fear there after the fact of, well, thank God I didn't succeed,
Yeah.
because otherwise my fate would have been doomed. And so there's also that sense of reverent fear of like, wow, you protected me from hurting myself.
Yeah, so it has Thanksgiving kind of attached to it as well.
Right. And I'd say it's not fear of punishment for me. It's fear of losing the relationship that's based in grace and mercy. You see this in the Psalms all the time.
Well, and I think that's why I wanted to spin that out, or that thought, because what supplants that when we don't have that reverent fear for God is, idolatry. Some other God will take its place.
100%.
Some other fear will take its place.
Right.
And you looking like, how does, I was commenting about Marxism and how Mao didn't quite get it right because he forced people into things that they didn't already want to have or to do. Right. Whereas I think we figured out since the 60s, the sexual revolution, when you think like today, it's fear of death is kind of holding people captive. And so they feed it.
Yeah.
Right. And then also prosperity, right? The fear of loss of prosperity, I think, is probably more importantly,
because we equate prosperity with those means by which we might prolong and extend our life.
When it's all that classic idolatry, then it's the Baal and Ashtoreth, it's the fertility gods.
Correct.
It's not really new.
No, it's never new.
It wears a new outfit.
Well, that's the problem with Satan, is because Satan isn't God. He's kind of stuck in his lane.
One trick pony.
He really is. It's a one-note Johnny kind of deal. It's like, well, we got this death cult and we got this fertility goddess because, we got to feed the death cult. What are we going to call it this time? And this is the point, but this is to your point about Mao, is that the reason that Satan always succeeds is because he sticks with what we want. The reason the formula works is because the formula works.
Well, I don't think Mao did, but certainly the Chinese Communist Party.
No, I'm saying Satan did. Like Satan's constantly just hammering the same nail because
he gave Mao what he wanted.
That's true. He did.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And this is what you see, though, is that, like I said, idealists make the best dictators. Morning, Paul. Because the idealist, in making his ideals a reality, when someone opposes that, they are automatically seen as the enemy. Because my ideal, this goal that I'm pursuing, is the satisfaction of my deepest cravings. And therefore, anybody who stands in the way of me satisfying that craving is, as a byproduct, evil or bad or malicious or hateful, you name it.
But if it's your deepest craving, then it's inherently selfish.
Correct. Which is why the whole system has to be rigged to turn selfishness into a virtue.
Oh,
which
so
is why everybody else is responsible for my health.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Everyone's responsible for my belief. Everyone's responsible for my health. Everyone's responsible for my sense of safety.
Yeah. And if you don't conform to what I want,
correct,
then
right.
And it ends up being this psychosis too, then.
It's a mass psychosis because you have a whole herd of people who are just following after the Pied Piper, so to speak. You're like, just call the tune and we'll dance.
Right. Well, then there's that word idolatry. Then people are really uncomfortable with it. It's the same way that we talk about demons and angels, right? And they're like, what are you talking about? That's just weird spiritual mumbo jumbo. You know, an idol is like, I don't know, like, somebody
as long as it's
like
something
14
bad,
hands and things.
I was going to say, as long as it's something bad that everyone can agree is bad, we're cool with that idol.
As long as it's universally condemned. Got it.
Correct. Like if you have a congregation of, and this is just me having fun. So let's say you have an entire congregation of either Democrats or Republicans, or at least predominantly one or the other. Then idolatry is going to be, well, you quote unquote worship the other side's candidate. And therefore, like we saw with the run up to the election in 2020, people attached their sense of meaning and identity and well-being and safety and security and health to a person.
Yeah.
One candidate or the other presidential candidate. So then everyone who votes for the other candidate is automatically guilty of false belief. Because we've elevated politics to the level of religion.
Turns out the idol was actually a lot bigger than one person.
Yes, it always is.
Yeah.
In fact, we could argue that those two people are just two arms of the same idol. Speaking of many arms.
Maybe, or at least they're just figureheads, they're representatives. They're like
they're totemic, right? That's the purpose of a totem pole, or just totems in general. They're totemic. They represent something.
Okay.
Yeah, they're a symbol of something greater than themselves.
Pull your mic back to 7 now.
Okay.
If you would. Now that we've got you nice and loud. I heard a little clipping there. Good.
All right. So as a consequence, an idol, like you said, we think of idols as, well, that statue in the museum of some pagan god from the Congo circa 800 AD or something like that.
With feet of clay and legs of bronze.
And we can even talk about idols in terms of credit cards or alcoholism and drug addiction or, again, sins in the abstract, evils in the abstract.
And relatively universally acknowledged.
Sure. And
overeating.
Also, what are you going to do?
We're already slaves to them, and there's nothing that can be done. Okay.
It's too big. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Not bank? Like that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah. Well, I was looking at that because a certain person said that we should stop using J.P. Morgan Chase because they got involved in the Georgia election law, and I'm like, man, how do I divorce myself? Because you think about like how hard it is to change banks, right? You're like, I'm really kind of enslaved to
isn't involved in evil stuff.
Well, that's true too. But I was just looking at it, it's like, all the stuff you'd have to change, everywhere that you've got, your card saved, the whole deal, right? Right. Like, they really do have you held captive, don't you? Yeah,
to convenience. They have you captive to convenience. That's the point, right? Everything that you said is just inconvenient. It's not impossible. It's not even difficult or a struggle in the sense of we have to walk 2,000 miles.
Well, yeah, and you have to actually, you don't have to, but they really encourage you to walk into a branch and talk to somebody to cancel as well. So yeah,
Of course.
that's a pretty big bar to cross, to to leap.
It's like I keep saying, our excuse me, our ethos in the United States is convenience. This is why, comfortably numb, I think, has become our kind of ethic.
Oh, I had a dream that I met, that I bumped into David Gilmour. And I just remember this dream now. And it must have been because of our conversation. I'm like, so David Gilmour, do you think, that Comfortably Numb was prophetic and that is describing, who we all are today? I don't remember his answer, but anyway.
Did he start to sing?
He started playing a guitar solo.
Nice.
Of course, and then the mirror ball opened up and it was just, it was an epic.
That's one of my favorite pictures of the last year is David Gilmour's daughter with her guitar saying, when you're trying to just play guitar and your dad's one of the greatest guitarists in history.
He's trying to show you how to play. And
He's trying to show you how to play the guitar the right way. There's no escaping idolatry because, as John Calvin said, our mind is a factory of idols. And obviously, any amount of time that you spend meditating on the Ten Commandments, especially the first, whatever you feel, love, and trust most is your God, it's not a long run-up to, I can name 10 off the top of my head that I have, false gods.
Just 10.
I'm just like right at the top of my head that I could just rattle off
without working too hard at it.
Right? Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But the problem is, as I tell everybody, Pastor, why do we always confess our sins? Well, because you don't actually believe in God's forgiveness because of this. It's like I said on Good Friday. Spoiler alert, because nobody listening was here Friday. The entire sermon for Good Friday was based on Friedrich Nietzsche's argument against the existence of God. Because it's the death of God, right? It was all about God is dead and we killed him. And that entire text that he writes is 100% spot on. And the reason
we've talked about it on the show here quite a bit.
Yeah. And the reason he rejects the crucifixion, in my opinion, is spot on. But he rejects the crucifixion as it's taught in total by the Christians of his generation.
Which is like, we should feel so bad about how the way God had to suffer for us?
It's extremely mystic and gnostic. Right, is that Jesus' suffering and death is a roadmap, a spiritual roadmap for Christians to follow, and yet the foundation of that teaching is we need to escape the flesh so that we can go to heaven. Our souls go to heaven when we die. And Nietzsche saw that as a rejection of reality, as a rejection of creation, even then. Which you and I as Lutherans would say, 100% you're denying reality because you're basically arguing that Jesus' death and resurrection was purely spiritual.
Right.
And therefore, teaching Christians to avoid suffering and hardship is to teach them to avoid taking up the cross and following Jesus. And that if there is an example, a baptismal example of Jesus that we are called to follow as Christians, like in Mark's gospel, for example, it is to be tempted and afflicted, to bear the cross, to be humbled because people will insult you, scold you, curse you, pile their crosses on your shoulders. They'll kill you. That's the Christian ethos. That's the message of the cross.
I think so. But you also look at the way that Christians are, when they look for this hopium that's going to get them out of, whatever, all of that stuff.
You did there.
You like that? I picked that up, and I thought it was a great expression. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're looking at ways to escape all of that, and they think that's what Jesus came to do, is to break them out of the flesh, to take the soul and elevate it out of the body so that you no longer experience these things, and you can look down and say, hey, look at my weak flesh, ha ha ha, that kind of thing. And it's like, no, actually, he drives you into the body.
Correct.
Not only to understand who you are, your mind, your heart. But also, the way that your eyes, lead you into sin. I mean, that's the first source of idolatry, is always what you see, and that leads to the heart, right? Think about it.
This is a family show, so we'll stick with the eyes.
Yes, okay. I mean, I guess your imagination is pretty powerful, but your eyes give you, the first kind of glimpse of things, right?
Yes. Well, this is why so many early Christian mystics and desert monks castrated themselves, because Jesus said, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. And so they would castrate themselves thinking, well, that will stop me from lust.
I mean, biochemically, it probably helps.
Right. Well, it probably helps as much as masks help prevent the spread of the virus of unknown origins.
Well, I'm going to say your hormonal balance is going to change.
That is
if you're
true.
male
I'll
anyway.
give you that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you starve yourself and live in a cave. Maybe there is something to this.
Right, but you already have the brain, wiring.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Right? We talked about. I think we've talked about it before on the show, but the brain study scans of people who are addicted to pornography.
Correct.
And what it's done to it actually rewires your brain.
Well, of course it does. Yeah, anything does. It's programming.
Yeah, well, programming, but with like a biochemical,
That's what I'm saying.
neurological
Anything that
change.
you watch repeatedly is going to alter the current, so to speak, synaptically. Because I noticed this. I'll listen to certain musical genres consistently, and then all of a sudden I'll switch to a different musical genre because whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
And my entire mindset, everything, my whole attitude about the day changes depending on the music that I'm consistently listening to.
Well, and everything that's attached to it too, all the
Correct,
memories that it
exactly.
triggers. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think this then drives us to the idea of, why does God command from the beginning, right? Is that that His word be on our hearts, our minds, as we go about our work, as we
Correct.
in all things, as we around the table. It does
Right.
and in everything. Well, it's because He's I guess by His word, He's wiring our brains on how to think and how to understand ourselves, and again drive us into not away from our life, but into our life. Into
our life, as He intended for it to be from the beginning. Which is why it's such an offense to me, especially. I say that especially in relation to like being an adult convert and coming to Christianity by conviction, coming to the Lutheran confession of faith by conviction. To say, well, God made me this way, but really what he ultimately intended was not for me to stay this way, but rather that I escape from this body into basically a non-corporeal, non-physical form. That's really what he intended all along.
Funny Pastor, what am I going to be like in heaven?
Yeah.
And it's like, you're going to be you? Like, what does that mean?
We talked about this in Bible study actually yesterday in relation to the gospel lesson on the resurrection.
Wait a minute, you had Bible study on Easter?
Yeah, of course. This train doesn't stop.
I thought it was a special day where the church was long and there was no Bible study.
Nope.
And you have breakfast.
No. Why? Man does not live by bread alone, Pastor Gillespie.
Nice.
But we got on this topic that I said just randomly about a month or two ago. I came across this etymological rabbit hole of the word personality, which comes out of psychology. It actually took the place of the word soul, which is why in pre-modern writing you don't find the word personality. Personality replaced the word soul. So when we say things like, well, she has a really great personality, or our personality is really clicked, what we're really meaning is like the thing that makes you, you. Strip away everything. So
that, it's a way of describing the essence of a person apart from the givenness from God.
Correct. Yeah. So what ends up happening, because my council president's wife has late-stage dementia, and he said, she's not, like, because of all the things from the dementia, she's not there, right? She doesn't know who I am. She doesn't know how to feed herself. But who she is still there. Her personality, he said, I mean, you mean her soul. Like what makes her is still there, even though she's not cognitive. She's not able to cognitively engage. Which, again, goes to the point then that the way in which God made us is this is who you are, and you can strip away everything from you, how you define yourself, how other people define you, what you think gives your life meaning and identity and all of these things. Strip it all away, and there's still you. But nobody can really describe what is that? Like, what is it that differentiates you from me at the end of the day? And it's really just your soul. And that's the point, though, is that it's not the soul goes somewhere and then the body and the mind rot. It's body, soul, and mind form one whole person. And to take any one piece away from them is to make them less human, which would mean less of what God intended for us to be, which is, again, the argument against, well, Jesus is the spiritual example for how we transcend reality, because A, it's not biblical, and B, it's thoroughly Greco-Roman.
Right, yeah.
Thoroughly. So it's a denial of humanity, which is really a underlying denial of God as a beneficent creator.
I was thinking about the expression that people do, like, you really see me, like, or you can see into my soul or something like that.
Yeah.
They're like, And sometimes they mean it like you're looking past my body, then you're seeing, my real nature, which I don't think is helpful because again, you're an integrated person.
You're starting to float away.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's like, or you see past my faults. No, maybe that's not so fault. Maybe that's not a bad idea, I guess. But if you see past the faults, it means you still acknowledge them.
Right. Well, I was going to say, I think one of the things that I speak a lot of in counseling is when you entered into this relationship with this other person, if you got married to this other person, you married the whole person, including the better or the worst part of for better or for worse.
And the parts that are going to change that you won't like.
Right. And so what makes that person who they are in total is also the stuff that you don't really like.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what we think. Well, if we could just strip away this thing from them, well, guess what? If you took that away from them, they wouldn't be who they are. And I know that's weird because we think, well, it's just the best parts of a person that make them who they are, make them lovable or whatever. It's like, no, all of those worst aspects also serve as leverage.
Isn't that kind of an idolatry of its own?
Yeah.
A worship of self.
Yeah, for sure.
But then we remake the self into the God that we want it to be.
Correct.
Oh,
yeah. Which brings us around to then Simone Weil, grace and gravity.
You got it.
I got it. It got here in 2 days.
Is it like is it public domain? I think it's in the public domain now. Who did the
Is
printing?
This is from Rutledge, Taylor and Francis Group. So a small publishing house.
I think we've read stuff from them before.
Probably. It's not that expensive. Again, one of my gods got it to me in 2 days. So
oh yeah, he's
so I
worth
said
a lot
to my
of money
wife, we can make it through this vaccine stuff until Amazon cuts us off, and then we're in trouble.
That's all right. They got their drivers, going without potty breaks. So.
I saw that. Amazon commercials are my favorite now. The ones on YouTube.
Where they try to justify their existence?
Yeah, the testimonials of real workers. It's the best job I have ever had. I have never had a better job than this one at Amazon.
Where the AI is tracing my movements around the entire factory all the time.
That's right.
Yeah. and giving me productivity scores.
Oh, sounds fun.
No.
So this is Simone Weil, Gravity and Grace, Idolatry, pages 60 and 61. Idolatry comes from the fact that while thirsting for absolute good, we do not possess the power of supernatural attention, and we have not the patience to allow it to develop. So
there's another.
That's it. Good night, everybody. We'll talk later.
What is absolute
I read this.
good?
I read this like
Absolute
5 or 6
good.
times, and then I had to like walk away and think about it for the rest. I texted you right away. I'm like this is just one sentence.
Right. Absolute good meaning, for us that would be whatever is of God would be absolute good.
Well, I would say this: it's absolute good from our perspective. And therefore, our idea of God reinforces that perspective of what is absolute good. Not necessarily because you and I would argue, well, there's only one thing that's absolutely good, and that's the death of Jesus for the sin of the world.
Yeah, we call it the day, Good Friday.
Yeah, that's why I call it good. In fact, that's why I pointed out that our murdering God is why it's called good. Because he actually chooses to allow us to do that violence to him in order that he can actually replace violence, defeat violence with forgiveness.
Well, it really brings the phrase, all things work together for the good of those who love him.
Correct.
Into a powerful relief there.
It's one of those things when you say it, even when I wrote it, it's like he chose to allow us to do violence to him, to treat him as our sacrificial lamb, so that he could forgive us once and for all for doing that.
It's our violence that brings about our redemption.
Correct. And you're like,
upside
but
down.
Isn't there a better way? And he's like, no. It's just who you are. Again, the personality thing. So it's just who you are.
And that pattern's been established from Adam. I mean, you have Cain and Abel making sacrifice right from day one.
A little bit.
So
there might be a little bit of precedent. Yeah.
The need for sacrifice to make atonement is
right.
It's a universal message of the scriptures.
Yeah. So idolatry, let's just, for the sake of simplicity, idolatry is essentially constructing your own God. Is what you're making your own God. Right. So it's like animal husbandry. What do you do with the husbandry part? Well, once you get older and you look up that, you're like, oh, okay, it doesn't have anything to do with marrying your horse. It is the act of taking care of animals. You're doing something. Likewise, idolatry is the doing of making gods.
So it comes from idolatria, the Greek, which eidolon and latreia put together. And eidolon is idol. It's literally idol, right? And then worship. Idolatry is the worship of idols.
Yeah. So worship
reverence,
of a god.
Love, admiration, fear, as we talked about before.
Yes. So this is we might have talked about this actually in the last episode. Then that the trouble with convincing people or convicting people that they worship a false god is the fact that it's really bound up with their love of things and people, and because love and greed are essentially the same thing, the jealous and vengeful part of my love is jealous and vengeful for human beings. It usually descends to violence.
Well, isn't greed just love turned towards the wrong aim? Yeah.
Right. Exactly. It's I'm going to force my love upon this thing, or I'm going to force this person to love me.
Well, it's like anger. I've talked about this frequently, that anger is not a bad thing, at least according to Jesus, right? Be angry, he even says, but do not sin. You see, so don't put my anger where it doesn't belong, right?
In love, in faith, you can totally put your anger there, though.
Well, I'd say, right, you give it to him in prayer, and as the Psalms do, as we talked about.
Literally, like the place for anger is in relation to people violating the true faith, which is why Jesus goes crazy in the marketplace. And
what I was just saying,
temple.
You can be angry with God all you want.
Absolutely.
And he'll suffer it. I mean, that's and it's actually a beautiful thing, because he ends up absorbing it in a way.
Well, this is the controversial take, and we're going to read this because it's from Luther in his John commentary. But the fact of the matter is, in relation to faith, I'm actually free to kill people. That's kind of how he gets through the Old Testament, is that in relation to faith, God tolerates nothing. You will be annihilated if you attempt to erect a false god. In relation to love, turn the other cheek, love your neighbors yourself, love your enemies, do no harm, do no violence.
We'll save that for a rainy day then.
But in relation to faith, that's going to be a rock'em sock'em robot of an episode, because most people obviously have been brainwashed into believing that Christians are just doormats. We're just supposed to be nice and just wait for the next world. Just wait for heaven. Everything will be better.
While you're steamrolled.
Yeah, while you're steamrolled. Ugh. Don't commit suicide. Just let other people do it for you. So idolatry comes from the fact that while thirsting for absolute good, we are thirsty for the absolute good. We do not possess the power of supernatural attention. That is, that we want to be God, knowing good and evil, but we are not God.
And we actually don't stick with it, right? That intention word.
Exactly.
Because we just chase after God. I mean, we have a whole series of them, and it's whatever fits our fancy today, but we're not even that devoted to the ones we create.
Right. Well, because they only need to last for a season, because I'm only here for a little bit of time.
Oh, okay.
So just get what I need from them and then check out, and let my kids worry about what God they're going to worship and what their God's going to provide for them. But I think that's the thing, is that, thirsting for absolute good, I automatically go to the Lord's Supper, or just hungering and thirsting for righteousness in relation to the gospel.
Sure. Yeah.
I might thirst for that good, and I may even confess in faith that is absolutely the absolute good. But, as you just noted, I don't have the attention span or the patience to allow that to, as she writes, develop. Meaning, I can't wait till Sunday. And rather than just call the pastor and say, hey, pastor, I'm really struggling right now. I need the sacrament. I need some gospel. Instead, we don't do that. We run the other direction, and we try to find something that's going to, essentially assuage my desires.
Right.
For good. And then I'll say, it's God's will.
Which is a false god.
Which is a false god, right? We talked about this also in the readings on Monday, Thursday, maybe. The sense of, you had Abraham had circumcision, Noah had the rainbow, Gideon had the dew around the fleece. These are all signs, but Jesus is the one time for all time sign that they were all pointing towards. They're all pointing to the promise, the promise, the promise, and then Jesus shows up and says, "Well, I am the promise."
Well, the point is, with those signs, you don't know that unless he tells you.
Correct.
Right. So he shows you, he tells you. I mean, I talked about this with Jonah on Saturday night. It's just how would you know that Jonah being in the belly of the fish was a sign of the resurrection unless he told you?
Unless
you
Jesus
might,
told you, right?
Yeah, you might make the connection, but then he says, no, that was a sign. Jonah himself and his life is a sign of my ministry in life.
Correct.
And life out of death, really. Like, oh, okay. And he does that with a lot of things.
Right. And that's such a great point, because Jonah is such a great character study in selfishness.
Oh, I know.
And God basically saying, no, you're 100% going to do this. He's like, I'm positive I'm not. And God's like, you're totally going to do this because you're a sign. And I like the way you describe that, because it offends me at a deep level, the way that you phrased it, in the sense of like, well, I don't really have a choice. This is just, he's a sign. God's going to use him. There's the word there, use, right? That we're just tools. We're instruments of God. And like we talked about a lot, we believe that we have personal agency in relation to God and our salvation.
Right.
And to be told that you're a sign of God's ministry offends, because we don't have a choice.
Well, instrumentality, it is maybe less than willful, but it is still being given to. I mean, you're being blessed. You just don't see it as a blessing.
Right. Exactly. I want a choice.
And certainly Jonah didn't experience it as a blessing. He's like, throw me overboard.
Right.
Like, oh well.
Well, at the very least, let me pick which city I get to go to. Right. We talk about this as pastors all the time. Pastors all the time are like, well, your will be done, but at least let me have a hand in which congregation I choose to serve.
Or at least a decent paycheck
throw me
or something.
Out of the congregation.
Yeah,
something.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Throw
we
me
want
a
to vote. So Weil continues, lacking idols, it often happens that we have to labor every day or nearly every day in the void. We cannot do so without supernatural bread. Idolatry is thus a vital necessity in the cave. Even with the best of us, it is inevitable that it should set narrow limits for mind and heart. Oh, it's so good.
So because it's limited to our perception, to our senses.
Yeah.
We can't imagine something more than what we can test, teach, feel.
And our perception is a fundamental denial of reality. That's why it's called perception versus observation.
The idea of objective reality, it's a great idea, but how is it actually experienced?
Exactly.
It isn't. It isn't experienced.
Yeah.
No, it's known, and I would known by supernatural revelation, right? By God's own revealing, but not by.
Correct.
I mean, this is why we've talked about this with the philosophers. Aristotle would be, a great example. And you're just like, I mean, he does seem to have a pretty powerful or keen sense of observation, of higher realities, but they're still so limited,
right,
in relation to what we would call, the real divine.
Speaking of idolatry, guess what today is? My wife just texted me. It's my ordination anniversary today.
I was going to say it's Easter Monday, but whatever.
More importantly than Easter, it's my ordination anniversary. Hello.
How many are you counting? What?
13.
13.
Yeah, I've been doing this for 13 years, which is longer than I've ever done anything in my life other than be married.
Isn't that something? I was like 5 year. I had a 5 year cycle going until I got into this, and then I'm like,
yeah.
And now everything's kind of sticking around. I'm still a dad.
Exactly. Despite my best efforts, I am still a father.
The coffee business is on 6 years, so I broke that cycle there too. Look at that.
It's just to the point. It's just weird to me. Again, because she texted me, I'm like, there it is right there. Perception is like, I just don't care if it's my ordination anniversary, because I stopped counting a long time ago. Same thing with sobriety. I don't count sobriety birthdays anymore, anniversaries, because today's today. And if I spend too much time looking backwards, and we talked about this before too, but when I spend too much time in the past, I can start pulling out all of the days I wasn't sober or all of the hours I wasn't sober. Same thing with the ordination. Like I can very clearly name at least 50 off the top of my head, at least 50 examples of the past 13 years where I muffed hard. Like I took a giant divot out of the course.
Right.
As a pastor, you're like, wow, I can't believe that God still let me be a pastor after that. Or
I would argue for me, it's like 6 or 7 years, but anyway.
Yeah.
Pretty consistently.
Off the top of my head, I can name 50. But notice how she says here in the first paragraph, she uses the word thirsting for absolute good. And then in the second paragraph, she says, we cannot do so without supernatural bread.
You think the sacrament is in the background here, huh?
I know it's huge. I know it is, because she was baptized in the Roman Catholic Church, but refused to ever join the Roman Catholic Church.
Oh, okay. I don't think we knew that in the last episode.
No, he didn't. Again, it's in her wiki where she got baptized. And again, she agrees with the doctrine of the church to an extent, but she disagrees with the institutional dogma of the church. And obviously the history of the Roman Catholic Church in Europe, she's well aware of that.
Well, and in France, it was effectively at this point still, the state church.
And Spain. Think about the way it was in Spain. And then she came to the United States.
Even more so in Spain, yeah.
Yeah. So it's, again, like we talked about in relation to Flannery O'Connor, the sacraments are all over Flannery O'Connor's writing.
Mm-hmm.
They're just not explicit.
No, this is even more explicit than that.
It is, right? Is that she recognizes there's some objective facts to the Christian faith that are non-negotiable, even as a Christian mystic, as she's been labeled. The bread and wine, thirsting for, the absolute good and knowing that we can't escape idols without supernatural bread. She's basically saying you need to fix your attention. You need to literally fix your hands and your mouth around something that's real, concrete, objective.
Right.
You can't just float through life on your perception of things and say, well, if I just pay attention to the cross, well, you lack the attention span to do that. You lack the power to do that. Well,
even
if I'm
just
patient,
the imagination, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just the imagination. You just don't have the patience. Focus on the cross. How long? Forever.
I found this with catechesis that people have kind of a shallow view of the revelation that he gives. Now, I mean, we've talked a lot about not speculating, but on the other hand, it's like there's often, you bump into things like 3 days or 7 days or, some of these patterns or pictures
3, 7,
of
21 and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you see it with like numerology or whatever, and like use your imagination there. Jesus wants you to see him in the preaching of the word and in the giving of the sacraments. Right. So when you go through the Bible, maybe like every time you bump into water, you might think, hey, does this relate to baptism in some way?
Right.
Maybe it's not one-to-one or whatever.
We've distinguished between what we call sanctified speculation, which is just, listen, the words of Scripture set a boundary. Stay in the boundary, like you said. Whenever water comes up, does that relate to baptism? Those are biblical precedents. These are biblical paradigms. Versus,
delivered through water, right?
Right. Versus every time you read about water, it somehow gets transcribed into some analogy from your life.
Right.
That is separate. Because we had this conversation yesterday, too, at Bible study, that anything that doesn't point to Christ but is considered or treated as sacramental has to be questioned with extreme scrutiny. Because really, like we were talking about snake handling because we read the end of Mark, and I was pointing out, because every Bible has that break, like this is really the end of the original manuscript that we have, and then this stuff that comes after, this is a different voice, it's a different tone, different grammar. And so it came up, like, why is snake handling so important? And I went through the history of snakes and what snake handling means in different cultures.
Or you could connect it to Genesis. And
you could, for sure, and I did. I pointed that out. But I also pointed out how it doesn't point you to Jesus.
It can if he's the one who crushes the serpent's head.
And then the snake bites you and you die.
Well, that's true too.
There's no forgiveness when the serpent bites you.
Unless you're Jesus, I guess, yeah.
Unless you're Jesus. So anything walking through fire, handling serpents, awesome. Those are found in other cultures too, though. And they don't point to the forgiveness of sin. Because you can walk through fire if your sins are forgiven. You can handle snakes if you have faith. But what if you can't?
I think the so-called original ending of Mark, and they left, they were afraid, and they told no one anything.
Exactly.
That's the perfect ending.
It is. For you and me, it is, for sure.
Yeah, because it's the
spinning
total
top
the cliffhanger.
At the end of Inception.
Yeah. You're like,
yeah.
But what happens? Well, what happens?
You're here. That's what happened.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what happened.
That's sanctified speculation. I don't need to be told that they went and told the disciples because I'm aware of the fact that they did because I'm here.
And there's other gospels anyway.
And there's other gospels too.
Let Mark just be Mark.
There is another gospel, but
obviously somebody, even if it was like one of Mark's students, or followers, was like, yeah, this isn't going to work for us.
Right. We're going to need a little bit more. On the end of Job, same thing.
Oh, that's true.
A little extra on there. A little extra.
Yeah, a little extra.
So idolatry, we got to break this down. Lacking idols, it often happens that we have to labor. We have to work every day then lacking idols. Or nearly every day, we work in a void. There's nothing. Empty, meaningless existence. We can't work every day.
Well, that's true if there's no God, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
You're just in a void. Like, what are you doing? Just floating through space? Pretty
Life
much.
is meaningless. Yeah.
Exactly. Idolatry is thus a vital necessity, and this is the key thing, in the cave, pointing back to Plato, shadow and reality, is that idols are a shadow of God, but they're not a real God. Just the same way that shadows in a cave are just that. They're a shadow of reality, but they're not the person themselves.
Kind of like Paul's expression that when we look in the mirror dimly, right? That there's something about the idol that is, what do you want to say, true but corrupted? Is that a fair way to put it?
Right. Well, there is a God. That's true.
Yeah.
Just not this one.
Right. And that we're built for worship.
That's true.
Yeah.
Just not this way.
Right.
So even with the best of us, it is inevitable that it should set narrow limits for the mind and the heart. Because it's not a real God, and therefore not infinite and not eternal, not almighty.
Yeah, and that's that mystic move, right? That there is something more, and it cannot be comprehended. It can be considered, but not in a let's put it in a box and define it.
Correct. Well, we talked about that with the Good Friday reading, the thickness of time and space. And
right. Yeah.
God has to push through that thickness to get to us. Ideas, she writes, are changeable. They are influenced by the passions, that is, by your cravings and desires. They are influenced by your fancy, your cravings and desires, by fatigue. So whether you're having a great day or having a bad day, these will influence then your desires and your cravings, and therefore your ideas will change based on where you're at that moment.
Yeah.
Activity has to be constant. It has to continue each day and for many hours each day. Motives for our activity are therefore needed, which shall be independent of our thoughts, hence of our relationships. Idols. We have to have a motive for activity.
Yep. There has to be a reason. That's what I talked about.
Yeah. This is a great example, actually, because my tattooist and his girlfriend came over for lunch after church yesterday, is that when someone gets a tattoo, one of the first things people ask are, well, what does that mean? What's the meaning behind your tattoo? And if somebody dares to say, well, there's no meaning, I just like that. It's an interesting conversation. I've actually do it to mess with people sometimes where I'm like, there's no meaning whatsoever, I just like fish. And they're like, okay, why?
Yeah, because you put it on your body as a mark.
Right. Yeah, it's permanent. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, I just like fish.
Well, I have one member who has it right like on her wrist. It says John 17:3.
Yeah.
Like, well, that's fairly obvious then.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an important memento of a verse for you, right? Well, which speaks of Christ, of course, and faith.
Right. But it's just funny that in that example, why would you let someone carve something permanent into your flesh if there's not a bigger meaning behind it? Why would you do that? Like, the expectation of the person who's looking at your tattoo is, well, there has to be meaning behind this. It has to mean something. Otherwise, why would you do it?
Which portrays that as much as somebody might think in terms of, gnostic, out of body experience, they don't actually believe that entirely.
No, I think they're more Manichaean.
What do you mean?
Well, they view the flesh as a necessary evil. But ultimately, they still make that distinction between like mind and body, or spirit and body, soul and body.
Right, but if the body was a necessary evil, then who cares what you do to it?
I think we're kind of at that point in our culture.
Well, certainly the transcending the body part.
Right.
I was talking transhumanism.
Well, to your point, was that you or somebody else? Anyway, I was listening to something this morning that, it was, Rogan was talking with Watson.
Yeah.
And they were talking about how at the end of every civilization, gender roles flip.
Oops.
Like, you can track it through history. The end of every civilization, at the very rock bottom, gender roles get all scrambled up and mixed up, and men become women, women become men, and then you have women and men claiming that they're not either gender. And you can actually track this through Greek society, Roman society, European society, all the way through.
Wow, I was thinking about who is it? Always that uncomfortable stuff in Gladiator, right? With the usurper. Yeah, is that Joaquin Phoenix that plays?
Yeah,
it? Yep. Yeah, I can't remember. His Roman name. What's his Roman name? Yeah, whatever.
Great. Now you're going to force me to remember Marcus Aurelius's terrible choice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And you look at it and like,
Commodus.
Just what a perfect name.
I know. I laugh at it. I giggle like a little boy every time he says it.
It's so perfect.
It's like the Monty
Right.
Python. I just watched the Monty Python Life of Brian piece.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
Biggest dickus.
Just can't
See?
help but laugh.
Like a child. Yes. That's
Well,
where
and
we're
it's also funny because it's like they're writing in Roman graffiti, right? In history of the world part, whatever it is
Yes.
too.
That's
They're
right,
like,
yeah.
But they didn't write Latin. They wrote in Greek.
Right.
Latin was the official language. It's just funny.
Nerd.
I know. It's funny. No, what were we talking about? Oh, how effeminate he is, and really kind of non-gendery,
Correct.
I guess. I mean, he's corrupt. He's just corrupt. In many ways, obviously, but that's
Right.
one of them, and that's one of the
Right.
indications of it, signs of
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Well, if you ever tried to watch the series Spartacus, that kind of comes through there too.
Oh, on the show.
Yeah, super fluid on their satisfying their lusts. Let's put it that way.
Are they presenting it on the show as a positive thing, given our current cultural
No,
context?
they literally present it as if it's almost like, what's that Netflix series with Joel Kinnaman where he comes back? They put his consciousness in a new body in the future, and he's got to hunt down a murderer. You know, you had the rich elites who had all the extra bodies laying around, and then the poor people.
I don't know.
You could constantly
Cancel Netflix.
transfer
Yeah,
altered carbon.
Altered carbon. Yeah. Oh,
like
the first
that.
season was great. Second season
Yeah.
was a disaster. Yes.
I never saw the second season because I refused to acknowledge that the first season was great. I thought,
It,
especially after the
it
second viewing.
ended up making the same turn as like The Matrix.
But in altered carbon, then especially the wealthy people, they didn't have any respect for their bodies. They didn't care about being nude or stuff because for them it was just like a sack, like it was
A
just
shell.
like something you put on, right?
Yeah.
It's that way in Spartacus too, where they just treat their slaves essentially, but even themselves, they don't really treat their bodies with any kind of respect or reverence, because it's just this is what you do. It's just normal. Like, when two wealthy people get into the bathtub and there's 6 slaves, he just starts having sex with one of the slave girls because he feels like it. And the slave girl just stands there and takes it because she's a slave. And if she doesn't, he's just going to kill her anyways and replace her with another slave.
Yeah. So how'd we get on this delightful
It's
topic?
so banal, but it's so banal the way that they treat bodies. And in transhumanism, back to your point,
Oh, there we go.
it's the same. It's the banality of the flesh, that the flesh is just like this necessary thing that we have to carry around with us. But if we can escape it, that's really the ultimate, for transhumanists, the ultimate goal of evolution is to eventually just escape mortality, thus the body.
It is interesting because when we heard the Genesis account 1 and 2 on Easter Vigil, and the dominion of man is not given to himself.
Correct.
It's given over the rest of creation, but he's not given dominion over himself. That's actually, God has dominion over man.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting. So then Adam and Eve are the the stewards of God's dominion over creation, the rest of creation, but not over other men and not over themselves. That's very interesting. Because that's the transhumanist move, is that is that we can become gods and that we can transcend ourselves.
And in order to do that, we have to escape gender, because God has no gender, as I was taught at seminary. Good old ELCA seminary. God doesn't have a gender. Because God
Or your
doesn't have a
gender
body.
is not given to you by God.
Or your gender is not given to you by God, it's given to you by the culture. And therefore, the disintegration of a society, which usually coincides with, by the way, the death of the gods, is the attempt to transcend the flesh once again by arguing in a kind of Freudian sense in the modern context, well, we all have to become kind of gender queer. Like we can't have
Or
preferences.
you at least need to
sexually.
experiment with it so that you can understand the other.
Well, you
what-
have to participate, not experiment.
what-
It's a call to participate in it.
Well, because if you don't participate, you don't accept it.
Well, you're the enemy. You're suspect. Participation in the ethics of the herd are a necessity to reinforce the behavior of the herd, because, again, ultimately, what you're doing is vile.
But like we talked about with the wiring of your brain, by participating, it changes
Correct.
you.
Yes.
Paul talks about this explicitly when it comes to, well, that's unintended there, but explicitly when it comes to sexual ethics, and that it's because it's done in the body,
Correct.
it has, has a different kind of effect upon you.
Well, we know, you and I both know people who, as drug addicts, did things under the influence or for the desire to acquire more drugs. They did things with their bodies and allowed other people to do things to their bodies that if they were clean and sober, they would never allow.
Right.
Because it would violate conscience and their belief that that's against God's will. But you replace the God of goodness who says of the body, no, it's a good thing, I made that, with a God who denies, is a life-denying God, body-denying God. Then it doesn't really matter what you do to your body because it's just junk anyways. And after you die, you get to be a soul.
So this is connected to idolatry because of the connection to the way that our idols are fulfillment of our passions.
Correct. And it's ultimately a denial of the cross. God
where
dies.
And where our passions die too.
Correct.
We talked about passion in the last episode.
Yeah. So the motives for our activity are needed, which will be independent of our thoughts, because then it becomes like that cycle, that kind of circular logic of I think it, therefore I do it, and doing it justifies me thinking it, and I just keep
want
going
it,
around it.
and so then I create it.
Correct.
But then I
The
need it.
Hegelian dialectic. Yeah.
Yeah.
You actually create a crisis for yourself that only you believe you can solve.
I have this problem with stuff. So I need the stuff, or I want the stuff. I get the stuff. Now I need the stuff, and I can't get rid of the stuff.
Now you need more of the stuff.
Oh, no, now we need new stuff, more stuff.
Oh, yes, that
Replace
too.
the stuff when the stuff
100%.
breaks.
Right.
You're like, can we just break the cycle? No, because it started with want, and now it's need.
Correct. And also you're in a society, again, of convenience. It's a convenience store society. Why would you break out of our ethic? Why would you reject our ethic?
Here's a crazy stat. This is a crazy stat, and it's almost universal. I mean, you get a job, even just it doesn't even have to be a great paying job. If you invest 70% of your income, for the first 7 to 10 years you work, you'll never have to work again.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, that's easier to do if you have a high paying job, I suppose, to live modestly. I mean, I look at it, I'm like 10 kids, what I make, 70%. No, we wouldn't eat. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's not do that. Right. But you look at it and you're like, really, that's how much we effectively waste, or that we burn through, I guess. It's not necessarily waste. It might be useful, but whew.
I have a teammate, actually, this past Saturday, we got done training and I was talking with him, and he did something similar where he essentially invested 70% of his income from the time he graduated college until he's like 30 right now.
Yeah.
He paid off his student debts from college because he invested, like I said, almost 3/4 of his income in just that.
Yeah, you don't end up with any assets, but you don't have the debt.
Which is why now we were talking on Saturday, then he was asking me about land prices and property values and houses and stuff because he wants to buy a house. He wants to invest. But he can do that now without the $30,000 in student loans over his head plus interest.
Well,
but in order to do that, while all of his friends were doing what they were doing, which was getting a job and then spending that money like, the narrator in Fight Club, buying a Kia, buying things you don't need, and then getting owned by the things that you think you own. His friends were just like, dude, why don't you just relax, slow down, and enjoy life a little bit? And he's like, I will when I get my student loans paid off.
Yeah.
So the peer pressure is always there.
He's got the discipline now that he can live on ramen, I guess. Or maybe something a little bit more healthy.
We talked about that too.
A little less MSG and salt.
Being young and poor and having to eat ramen.
I don't know why ramen is the placeholder there, but that's what it is.
It's a very versatile noodle.
I suppose.
You can eat it raw. You can use it to repair things. It's a great patch for broken things, holes in tables.
You're in bad shape though when you start like taking the cooking water and you start eating, drinking that too.
Yeah, when you start, when you save the broth from the ramen, you're poor. Speaking from experience.
Yep.
But this is key, right? Ideas are changeable, which is why we have to constantly take our ideas and make them into actions, which justify the idea. It's circular, like I said.
Yeah.
So here it comes. All men are ready to die for what they love. They differ only through the level of the thing loved and the concentration or diffusion of their love. No one loves himself. That's, again, I've been thinking about this one since I read it last week. No one loves himself.
But we just talked about selfish. But you take your selfishness and you put it into something else.
Right. And then you're trying to change that thing into an ideal version of yourself.
You try to become it. Or
you try to make it become you. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you bring it into yourself, right?
Correct. So this is why when you get married, one of the biggest struggles that people have when they're first married is the necessity of changing your partner, your spouse.
Right, because you've integrated that person into your own identity.
Correct. Right. Rather than allow them to exist as an individual outside of you, you integrate them into your personality.
But I mean, vocationally, or what would be the right word? As far as the holy order, God has set you into order in relationship to this person, which is immutable. I mean, it's there.
Yeah.
But you're still you.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is the thing. If I could love myself, going back to the absolute good thing, if I could love myself as the absolute good in my life, I wouldn't need anyone else in my life.
Some people try to do that.
Yeah, right, exactly. I think that's your point, right? We try to do that. We set up cultures, communities, systems, institutions, psychology, philosophy, theology of self-love. But
what does she mean by love? Maybe that's the problem here.
Could be all men are ready to die for what they love. Well, does she mean, again, passions? Because it's in the, it's coming right after the paragraph on passions, lust.
Right. But no one loves himself. I mean, in one sense, like you said, if people are selfish, that's the negative sense of self-love, right? Mm-hmm. But she may mean the other sense. I mean, like self-respecting, that you don't actually, otherwise you wouldn't pursue these idols that destroy you.
Well, I think this is the point, though, is in the next paragraph. She says, man would like to be an egoist and cannot. Meaning, I would like to be pure ego. I would like to be completely selfish, self-sustaining, self-preserving, self-centered.
Right.
But I can't. This is the most striking characteristic of his wretchedness and the source of his greatness.
Despite every attempt to live independently, we never do.
Yet, it drives us to great achievements, to invent things.
So the individual self-pursuit?
Yes. The pursuit of the big question, who am I?
Well, I mean, it is true. I mean, I was listening to an interview, or actually a conversation about, Karl Marx, not his political philosophy so much as his life.
Just that he was a lazy beggar.
Oh, what a terrible guy. Do you know what his nickname was? His one son called him Devil.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, is that because of how he looked? He's kind of disheveled and he had the crazy beard.
Nope.
And then his other friends called him Old Nick. Mm-hmm. And the host didn't know the background of that, and I didn't either. And I mentioned it to
Nick means
to Anne.
To steal, but also as a code for Satan.
Yes, exactly. Old Nick is code for Satan. So it's like, so his friends called him Devil. His son calls him Devil. Mm-hmm. Apparently, he was a big time binge drinker.
Yes, he was.
Ingalls kind of bailed him out all the time, but didn't
all the time. Yeah,
but
Ingalls bailed out his daughters too, by the way, until he cut him off.
That's right. Well, and he had an illegitimate daughter from a servant, and she had to sneak in the back just to see her mom because her mom worked in the house. Just, he's really a fraud of a man by our normal estimation of what it means to be.
But again, it goes back to Nietzsche's point about why he hates Socrates and Plato so much, and even Aristotle, which is that at the end of any great civilization, these philosophers come along who take the vices that were previously like, these are the worst aspects of our culture, and elevate them to the level of a virtue. And then all of these people that are disenfranchised, they lock into that and they're like, yes, you're right.
And that's where I was going to go, is that Marx, he elevates his own selfish pursuit that he wanted to live a lifestyle that he was born into.
Yep.
But then he got caught. He spent all of his inheritance on, what was it? It was alcohol mostly.
Good times. That's what he spent
on good times.
His passions.
But he wanted to continue to live that lifestyle, right. and he would use other people to accomplish that, which is actually a fundamental tenet of Marxism.
Yes,
it doesn't ever actually say, well, where does stuff come from? Where does wealth come from?
Right.
Right. Instead, it just says, I'm going to take. Well,
it doesn't matter where it comes from. Give it to me. I don't care who made the hot dog. Give me the hot dog. I'm hungry.
Everybody deserves a hot dog.
Yes. So long as I get the first hot dog.
Yeah, well, that's also true. There's always somebody in charge.
Well, this goes back to her point, though. No one loves himself because it's impossible to be a pure egoist.
So that's my point, is that Marx could not live in isolation, either of his own passions.
Like Diogenes, right? We talked about this in relation to Diogenes living in his barrel. You kind of need a city around you to take care of you because you have no discernible income. You have no means of getting food or drink. You have no protection. So all these people provide this for you.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing with Marx. If
That's
there's no
ultimately-
Engels, Marx just starves to death or dies in a gutter.
Yeah, we wouldn't get all of his, anyway, the hundreds of millions of people
Nonsense.
that died as a consequence of his really terrible ideas.
Yeah. By the way, if you ever wondered what happens when you elevate vice to a virtue, hundreds of millions of people are executed. That's what happens.
Yeah.
Which proves the fact that it's a vice, not a virtue.
Oh, the death of people?
Yeah. Yeah. Usually, good things don't promote the execution of people who disagree with you. Which is why guys like MLK kind of get vilified in the present tense, even by people who used to be big supporters of MLK.
I was thinking about this in relation to Christian martyrdom then, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not self-sacrifice, right? I mean, it's almost like that violence that's an unfortunate consequence. I hate to use that word, unfortunate, but I mean, yes, it follows, but it isn't good. Although the church does seem to do better
The blood
in
of the
time of
martyrs and all that.
persecution.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Right. I'm just thinking about your thought there. But no, Marx could not live independently of other people. He was actually completely codependent, not only on Engels,
Correct.
but, because he was a slave to his vice,
Right. Well, he's a loser.
ultimately.
Let's just put it as simply as possible. He's a loser. And therefore he appeals to that kind of mindset that says,
So then
how can I do as little as possible and yet still enjoy all of the benefits of society?
universal basic income.
Yeah. Basically.
Well, God made us for work. I mean, that's part of the problem with the whole,
Yeah.
I think, Marxist agenda is that you're
Right.
like, wait a minute. No, having robots do everything for you and sitting around. I mean, we've seen Wall-E. We know how this turns out.
Well, the struggle isn't with work. The struggle is with the kind of work that you're doing.
Oh, that you just don't like it?
When you have mindless, like humanity killing work, it's dehumanizing and kills your soul. Of course you're going to hate your boss or you're going to hate the system you're in.
What? No, I spent K through 12 learning how to live that life.
Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. It's
The factory model of anything. Oh man, it's just
right.
It's soul killing.
The word factory and schooling should not be in the same sentence.
I know. Well, it's used pejoratively that way.
Hopefully.
I catch bits and pieces of this movie from Pixar, Soul. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah, right. Just again, same with me, clips.
Yeah, because Naomi seems to like it. I like the music, but it's all this gnostic mumbo jumbo.
Yep.
But it does actually. I got a little bit this morning. I'm like, oh, they're talking. There's a little rant about how school just programs people into these boxes, and I'm like, yeah, you're actually right. I mean, of course, people making an animated feature film are going to be artists, and they probably all
Lean
suffered
one
under
direction.
some kind of oppressive, what they view as an oppressive factory model. But
So this is the most striking characteristic of his wretchedness then. The fact that he cannot escape his own ego and yet kind of wants to live there.
right. But then, the source of his greatness.
I want to be more than I actually am. This goes back to perspective again. My ego, which is just the old Adam, let's put it bluntly, the ego is just another word for old Adam, sinner.
Sure.
This is who I want people to see me as. This is how I want the world to perceive me. This is the reality that I want to put out there in the world for people. Versus, just reality, which is that's not who you are. And I don't care.
Right, but
I can fly by flapping my hands. And reality is like, no, you can't.
But that greatness is, if you're not, if you don't have an ego, you ultimately don't have imagination.
Correct. You never invent the airplane because you figure, well, I jumped off the roof and crashed to the ground and broke my arm. Guess I can't fly. On to the next thing.
Yeah. Huh.
Versus, no, I'm going to invent a way to fly then. I'm going to figure this out.
So, you equated ego with original sin, with the flesh, but there is a way that God then uses that, for our benefit.
This goes back to Jonah, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, he uses it for his benefit because, what else has he got to work with?
that's true.
Man always devotes himself to an order. Only, unless there is supernatural illumination, this order has as its center either himself or some particular being or thing, possibly an abstraction. It's almost as if she was listening to the show when she wrote this.
I have no idea what she's talking about. Yeah.
Right? With which he has identified himself. That, for example, Napoleon, his soldiers, science, or some political party. It is a perspective order.
So this is another way of talking about, man is built for worship.
Right.
You could say man is built for order, to live in order.
Same thing, though, isn't it?
But what are you ordered under, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Because ultimately you're under. I mean, nobody's at the top of the pile. Mm-hmm. There's always somebody above you.
Well, I think this, though, whether she intends it or not, we can work our way back to the previous paragraph that our ego drives us, compels us to enforce order on the world, like we've talked about with like planting trees and reforesting areas.
Yeah.
This is how you bring order to the world. Everything in straight lines, 45-degree angles. And then God invents something and you're like, that is chaotic. I'm sorry, that's not orderly at all.
No, and it's like you can see this in architecture. You had Trump, right, like in his last days, issued the executive order. Biden already revoked it, but about a ban on what was it, like modernist buildings, modernist federal buildings.
Kidding.
Yeah, no, he had he even like created some kind of institute that's probably been also now just
canned.
Right, to like encourage neoclassical architecture again in federal buildings. Like with columns and Greek and Roman, building on that. But because it was something weird about him. Is weird about him. I suppose he's still around. Is that he has this sense of, I don't know where he got it from, but that we need to be built upon. We're always built upon our past. You can't transcend your past. You need to embrace the best aspects of it.
Right.
Well, and I guess connected to Marx, right? Is that you can't build back better unless you just say we've destroyed everything that came before.
Exactly. Yeah.
Huh. So it's kind of like a signaling to say, you remember the Greeks and Romans? Yeah, we're dependent upon them for logic, for reason, for society, for democracy.
Right.
Some of these.
So we
ideas.
will devote ourselves to some order as we perceive it to be. And
right, but that's my problem with this new order. New world order. There it is. Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like
it's somebody else's version of reality.
And neither are probably perfect representations of the truth, right?
Mm-hmm. So we do this. We impose this order. We have it at the center of our being. But unless there's supernatural illumination, guess what? We end up worshiping something abstract, like a person.
Yourself, something else, someone else, or even just an idea.
Yep. It's about a perspective. Not about actual order, but perspective order. I love that.
So that's connected to tribalism as well, right?
I mean, everybody. So. Observable order, going back to the example, observable order is look at the woods. That's how God orders creation. There you go.
But it doesn't look very orderly.
Exactly. To us. This is why I've had friends in the past, for example, who will say, well, God's a mathematician, and math is really ultimately the language of God. I'm like, that is such a human answer to the question of God.
Yeah, Fibonacci sequence or something.
Yeah, it has to be ordered. Everything has to be orderly. God cannot be out of our control. Oh,
I see where you're going there.
There we go.
It's true, though. You can observe some regular order. That's why I mentioned the Fibonacci thing. You see that repeated throughout creation.
Even liturgically.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we have the ordering of the days and whatever. Yeah. Her point is that was illuminated to us.
Correct.
So imagine what our calendar would be like had God not ordered things, it's given us that ordering.
Right.
Well, we're still arguing about the calendar, aren't we? Some people are still in Lent. We're in Easter. So,
It's true. Well, some people think Easter's a day.
Well, there's that too. I had somebody say it on Sunday and it was so beautiful. It was such a beautiful moment. It's like, I wish every Sunday was Easter. I'm like, it is?
It is.
Like, no, you're absolutely right.
Ta-da! It is.
maybe we don't let it be. That's probably...
No, maybe that's part of it too, yeah.
We get in the way, We don't pull out the stops, all that kind of stuff.
The pageantry is not there the next Sunday.
No, we can do a procession every Sunday, but then it'll be normal. And then it'll be like, it's not Easter. I'm like,
yeah, well then for Easter you do nothing, and then that'll be special.
Ooh, the minimalist Easter.
Yeah.
That won't
Human
go
nature.
over well. No.
Human nature. We do not have to acquire humility. There is humility in us, only we humiliate ourselves before false gods.
The end.
That's such a gut punch. It's not like we have to go looking for humility. It's in us. We just use it to, rather than being humbled, we humiliate ourselves.
Isn't that something? So God uses the idols to humiliate us, is how I would put it.
Yeah.
I keep importing God. She doesn't, but I do.
Yeah,
It's implied.
It's implied. So that would mean then, Pastor Gillespie, that we humiliate ourselves before our false gods, worshiping our false gods. And we do so then, again, in the name of piety, devotion, reverence, because we're worshiping God. And who do we not love more than God?
Golden calf? I don't know.
That's what I'm saying, though, is if this goes back to the point of love, too, is worshiping a false god. Let's just break it down. So let's say you're in a Christian church, one of our Lutheran churches, and you're worshiping a false god. Would you know it? Unless, to her point, without supernatural illumination, without the revelation of God, would you know it?
Well, I mean, this goes for preaching, I think, too. Yeah. You know, is that people, I suppose you can make your pastor into an idol, you know, someone that you fear, love, and trust in more than God. And you'll take whatever he says, you know, as the God's honest truth. And you're like, I'm not comfortable with that even as a preacher. And it's the same thing with scriptures too. I mean, the Lutherans in particular, I think, you know, probably most Christian traditions, there's the King James only people who are weird. Sorry if you're a listener or watcher. But for most of us, we're like, no, manuscript traditions, we look at that, we compare manuscripts, you know, because we want to know what the revelation was. Right. And when there's doubt, we make sure we're clear about, you know, we're not quite sure what the, you know, quote unquote authentic reading is here. But here's the things that, you know, the scriptures are clear about. And that's the revelation. And that's it. You know, sometimes we're like, I don't know what that really is talking about, but that's what it says. So we just run with
eventually I will, because he'll reveal it to me if he wants to.
Right.
Just not right now.
But I do think, you know, one of the patterns or orders that God sets in place that we've talked about, and I've been kind of emphasizing in preaching, is the, you know, the cycle of death and resurrection. But you see it in the life cycle of civilizations, like we talked about with, you know, the decay into all sorts of hedonism at the end of a civilization. Yeah, it's like God does that. He gives people over to their idols, to the things that they want, that they desire. You know, where they put their fear, love, and trust, and it destroys them. Yeah. Yeah. And then he raises a new people to life.
I think this is probably what's so frustrating and why we choose to be amnesiac about history, because I can't remember. This goes all the way back to Plato, actually. It's called the eternal recurrence of the same, meaning if you observe history, you notice patterns. We keep doing the same things over and over and over again.
This seems familiar.
And it can lead to a certain kind of nihilism in the sense of, well, this never works, and ultimately we just keep doing the same thing generation after generation. We end up in the exact same spot as the previous generation. We never learn anything, so what's really the point anyways?
Well, it's not exactly, malicious.
Not nihilism necessarily. Well, it does lead to that, but relativism.
Right, but I was going to say it's not like personally malicious. It's not necessarily always like this grand plan among humanity to destroy others or something like that.
What we do.
But it's always malicious to God and towards his word, right? And it just keeps happening over and over. And God calls them, read the book of Chronicles would be a great example of it, right? Yeah. That cycle of falling into idolatry, false worship, being brought to repentance by the Lord, they repenting, finding God's word in the temple again, you know, celebrating a Passover, which we haven't done for a long time. Hey, that's great. And then intermarrying and right? And it's just like, you know, and I think we see life-death cycles even in local congregations. We see it in our country right now. You know, I mean, this country's young, so we haven't been through that much, actually, historically speaking.
Correct.
You know, so
we're still number one because we just did it faster than anybody else before us.
No, actually, the average length of a civilization is about 250
years. I know.
Who said that? I don't know. I read it somewhere.
I can't remember who it was. Some person who's smarter than the two of us.
Probably Malcolm Gladwell or somebody.
It was somebody. You sent me the quote, but But that's it. That's idolatry. From Simone Weil. There's a lot in here to feast on.
She, you know what I like about it is she says some pretty, significant things, but then but she doesn't fill in all the gaps.
Yeah, exactly.
Which gives us plenty of things to talk about.
It does. That too.
What's in between here?
She says what she wants to say, obviously. And then, well, also, side note, this was published after she died. And it was published by a friend of hers from her notes and journals.
Right.
So in that sense, too, like Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, this was never intended to be published.
Oh, so it might just be a sequence of like
it is, because if you read her other books don't flow like this. Books that she wrote before she died have a more prosaic narrative structure to them.
So this is more of the aphorisms.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Do you know about the fourth turning theory?
No.
Yeah, so this has been the argument that they were in the midst of a fourth turning. These happen about every 20 to 22 years.
Okay.
Strauss and Howe. Anyway, you can read about that. There's all sorts of... I guess I don't know who gave the 250 year thing, but there's all sorts of theories about life cycles of civilizations. You can go read it.
Because it keeps happening. It's a pattern. But we're in the midst of the disintegration of our society, obviously, our civilization. I shouldn't say obviously, that's pretentious. I think it's obvious. Maybe to others I'm deluded, so I'll accept that as well. But anyways, we're in the disintegration of our civilization currently, tracking patterns, tracking historical events and phenomenon. So idolatry obviously comes up quite often on this show, and we've covered it. I think next time we should cover evil, since we're on the topic.
Ooh.
And dive into evil. Again,
when do you want to get to Luther? When are you going to get to Luther? We talked about Luther. We'll get
whenever
to it.
we want.
He's in the background. He's always there.
Always there.
He's always there for us.
He's always there.
We're Luther haunted.
That's true. So, no, I just, like you said, I like Simone. I mean, the section on evil is like 10, 12 pages actually. But I just like the fact that she is, what's the word? Terse. She chooses her words carefully. She says what she wants to say, and then she moves on.
Well, and that is kind of the mystic move too. I mean, with a mystery, you're not trying to.
Yeah.
You're only trying to say what you know, and not trying to say more than that. And that's helpful. We've talked about that with scriptures in general.
Right.
And we talked about it earlier in the show with the speculation. You can use your imagination, but like we talked about with the Passion account last week.
Yeah.
It's appropriate for young children up to grown adults. But ultimately each individual fills in, what the evangelist doesn't record. So it can be as gruesome as you want it to be or need it to be, but no more than that. The key is that he died.
Yeah. She's got a great section in here on affliction. Affliction compels us to recognize as real what we do not think possible. I should not love my suffering because it's useful. I should love it because it just is. Just part of just part of life. But she does that. She just drops these little bombs constantly. She's got a whole section on violence in here. It's 2 pages. She's got we read the cross already, or at least a piece of it. It's actually much longer in here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages. But yeah, she just these little aphorisms, like you said, these little meditations. Like she has a whole section on the distance between what is necessary and what is good.
Sounds like a plan.
Atheism as a purification. So, anyway, sorry. I just fall into that. But anyways, I love her. I love the fact that she was a beautiful young woman who chose to make herself ugly on purpose because she never wanted to be basically judged by her looks. And therefore, she also avoided relationships with people because she saw it as a waste of time when she could be pursuing things like helping the poor or fighting in our civil war for the rights of the oppressed. So she's multifaceted, very interesting. And like we talked about, I think last time, the Roman Catholic Church basically sees her as a heretic. But a lot of Roman Catholics really like her. She's really high on a lot of lists.
That's how it goes, right?
Yeah,
that's what we do on the show. We read Lutherans that a lot of Lutherans don't like. So the same story.
So yeah. So as Gillespie and I slowly but steadily descend into being banned books ourselves, we thank you for your time and attention. We thank you for everything you do to support 1517 and all the other podcasts and publications and all that we do there. Otherwise, we'll talk to you next time for a brand new episode. Peace.
Hijack. Hey,
I didn't call out the
After-
episode. At the beginning, I didn't call out the episode number.
yeah, 199. We did forget to do that. Oh well.
That's okay. This is short enough.
Hey,
You can just use this as one episode.
Right. So the thing that was broken, I fixed, but also I
What
broke
was
something
it?
else in the process. What was happening in your recordings is it was recording both channel 1 and 2 from the Zoom. But channel 2 is actually just static noise and
Cool.
no sound.
Oh, right.
So-
yeah.
So yeah, so that was lowering your level. So we're
Thank
back
you,
in business
Melody.
now.
I appreciate that.
Back
Good
in
episode.
business. Oh yeah, we're just talking here while we're live. Hey, whatever.
Yeah.
We didn't
all good.
answer this question. I've had 2 people close to me tell me that this doesn't belong in our show. But now it is here. If they worship the vacation over themselves, selling your soul for vacation. I
Well, it
mean,
goes
I
back
think
to the point of passions.
yeah, and I think the way that we have to push back against these corporations terrorizing people. You know, they have. If they're, I guess it comes down to. I mean, like, are you going to be a risk to others? And we bought into that lie that we're if you, well, frankly, if you're vaccinated, it's not going to prevent you from spreading the disease. So that's a misconception that people have
Right.
anyway. There's going to be plenty of disease regardless of whether you're vaccinated or not.
Correct.
And it's going to spread either way. So you're just not going to develop symptoms, supposedly, at least not from the virus. You might develop other symptoms, which would be quite unfortunate. So I don't understand why the corporations are getting involved at all. I guess they want people to feel safe, but it's such a misleading. It's a false sense of security. So how much of this are we going to?
They don't want people to feel safe at all. I think it's quite the opposite. I think they want people to be completely fearful the rest of their lives so that they can constantly sell them more and more product.
Well, I saw. I can't remember which baseball team it was, but you had to show one of 3 things. You had to show your vaccine, passport, or whatever, your CDC card. You had to have a negative PCR test within 72 hours or something, or a negative antigen test within the last 6 hours, I think it was. I mean, so before you can walk into the baseball stadium, you have to go get a test. And of course, as we know, they harvest the data from these tests. Like state of Wisconsin, here, I can't speak for every state, but here, all of the, wherever you get the test done, so Walgreens, for example, Walgreens, that's now their personal data, whatever they harvested from you in the process of that.
Yeah.
Whether it's genetic or DNA or if it's just, some biometric stuff. Now they now own that information about you. So how much information do you want these people to actually have? But I mean, this is all just still Patriot Act stuff too.
Yeah.
It's just another level of privacy that's being, undermined.
Yep.
And why is privacy important is because we're talking about autonomy then.
Correct.
So it's just becoming slaves of the state, and the state is not just politicians in Washington, which is a dumb
Obviously
view.
not, judging by the number of celebrities that shill for the state.
Oh yeah, you saw the thing about the little window badge you can get to show that you're a healthy or a safe place to be. It costs $2,750.
Yeah, I can't remember. I've seen that before historically. Where else have I seen people?
Where
put
businesses
things in
were
their
marked?
windows?
Yeah. Or people were marked with sign. Yeah.
Stars.
I don't know. Seems familiar.
Weird.
But I know it's not a 1-to-1 correlation, and you're not allowed to talk about Nazis, but or Hitler.
Correct, because of the principle, theorem, whatever it's called.
Do you know though that the global world order thing that part of the reason why we can't talk about Hitler is because he actually undermined it.
Sure.
That the Trilateral Commission picked up. I didn't learn this till a while ago, but they picked up the ball that was dropped basically in the late 30s. Because Hitler distracted the whole globalist agenda. The FDR was part of that. I mean, there were the Green New Deal, or not the Green New Deal, the Old New Deal. The Old New Deal.
Correct. The Old New Deal.
So then it stalled, and then you see Trilateral pick it up. Of course, they fund both the countercultural revolutions, with drugs and all the other stuff,
Correct.
musicians, the whole deal, and they're still working on it. This whole countercultural, and now it's so clear the attack is family, church, what?
Yeah, I'm surprised more people
Humanity.
didn't get arrested yesterday at church.
I will say I was going to take you did the selfie. I was going to take a picture of the church, and I'm like, I bet you there's some people in here that don't want their picture on the internet.
That's why I didn't at the end of the service. I decided not to either.
Yeah.
Because I actually get pissed off when people do that on social media, where they post pictures basically like inviting people to come and arrest them. Like, we're making the law. I'm like,
we had the streaming video as the backs of heads, but you know, I mean, if somebody really wanted to come after us, they could. They've got plenty of evidence.
That's my point. We had the church wide open yesterday. We had the windows open. I had the front doors open on purpose.
Yeah.
Had the organist turn the organ all the way up to 11. Like, if people were going to get mad and call in on us, they were going to do it yesterday for sure. Our parking lot was full. We had people out in the streets. We were busting pinatas open out on the sidewalk after church.
Yeah.
So,
did you end up doing the
I couldn't find one.
The Judas pinata? Oh,
I could not find a person. They had a green one. I was like, no, Judas isn't green. So we got a donkey and a star instead.
That's fair enough.
Yeah. It's fantastic. Watching those farm girls bust those pinatas open. It's good times. So we call the Billy Club the Stick of Destiny.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah. But no, it was a good time. And again, every little thing like that, every little push where you're a little bit more people in church, you're a little bit louder, a little bit more out in the open about it, the more encouraging it is to other people to do the same.
Well, and that's that one video I sent you about, was the guy in Florida. Did you watch it, the 10-minute one, where they come to interrogate him about what he wrote on the internet?
No.
Yeah, okay, I thought I sent it to you. It's pretty long, but you watch it, and you know, they're not the police, they're the PR police.
Oh, interesting.
So it turns out he had written an executive order for DeSantis. And in his letter, he said, and I'm demanding as a citizen that you sign this into law. And they saw that as a threat against the governor. It's like, wow. No, he works for me.
Yeah.
But anyway, so they came and interrogated, but he was really forceful, but gentle at the same time with them. Mm-hmm. And but he makes that point. He asked the one guy, he's like, clearly you keep, with your mask, you're not real happy wearing it. He's like, no, I'm not. I'm like, then what? And he's like, well, why are you wearing it? He's like, well, because if I don't, I'll get reprimanded. I might lose my job. He's like, yeah, that's probably right. He's like, but how about the rest of you? Well, we don't really like it either. Well, if you all stop wearing it, correct, they're not going to do anything. They're not going to fire all of you.
That's the problem with herd mentality. You're always looking around for somebody to lead the charge.
Oh, right. Exactly. Yeah.
You just stand there and get...
So I think that's the answer to Simon's question here. Is like, you got to push back. If you don't push back, correct, they're just going to keep doing this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But if you say, no, I'm not going to do that, especially you've seen this with it's like the old, what were the bombs, where people would show up, not the blow up things, but not photobomb. Oh, flash mobs.
Oh, the flash mobs, yeah.
Now people are doing that, like unmasked flash mobs, basically.
Correct.
They all show up at the store together, unmasked, and like, well, now what are you going to do?
Well, people say this about my wife because she goes into stores without a mask on, and she has a legit medical condition. Right. But she walks in and they're like, do you have a mask? She's like, no, I have a medical condition. And then they either say, okay, and then she just goes on, or she doesn't. And people will then say, well, I could never do that. I'm like, do you realize that we've gotten to this state as a society where you as a person are afraid to say out loud, I refuse to wear a mask?
Isn't that incredible?
Like, that's all. You're not even, it's not even a moral statement. You're just like, I can't wear a mask. I have a medical condition. I refuse to wear a mask, whatever. Like, you're so afraid to even say words, let alone do something, that you just go along with whatever is there because, well, again, get along to go along.
Well, and even a year ago, if somebody had told you, like, after you're vaccinated, you'll still need to wear, double masks and keep social distance, you've been like, you're crazy. They're not going to tell us to do that. The vaccine, Right. Well, one, they wouldn't have said there would have been a vaccine, which is also a little curious.
If you track the patent backwards.
Yeah. The technology was already in place. It was just a matter of importing this.
But we do this all the time. People get flu shots every year. There's no proof whatsoever those flu shots prevent you from getting the flu.
Right, but I didn't have a problem with the flu shot in a sense of if people want to get it, they can get it. And, and most people's experience that I talk to are like, yeah, I hate getting it because I always get sick afterwards. I'm like, then why do you do it?
Right.
I'm like, well, because it protects me. From what? Because you got sick. Like,
exactly. What does it exactly protect you from? Do you understand how your immune system works? Do you understand what germs are? Do you understand what a virus is? Do you understand how bacteria functions? No.
Right.
Because you weren't taught. I was never taught that stuff in health class. I had to go find that out for myself.
You need to watch this guy's video because he took that was a whole nother part of the rant with these people. Yeah. And they ended up leaving like, thanks for everything you've said. Thanks for what you're doing. I mean, he ends up, in a sense, converting them in a way. I mean, yeah.
Well, that's my point. Be respectful. Don't be unkind. Don't be brutal. Don't be belligerent. Be respectful, but be firm.
Yeah. And go on vacation if you want. But, I mean, the cruise ships aren't going to run for another year anyway. So why would you want to go on one of those anyway?
Stay off the cruise ships. It's just a floating disease.
Right, and maybe end up not traveling to places that you'd like to travel just because it's not worth the struggle.
By this summer, you and I won't be allowed to travel anyway. So
no, it's true. Well, you can still go to Kentucky or
just drive
Arkansas, right?
Yep.
But what do you do when you have to pull over?
Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
Do what you got to do.
Yeah. Exactly. Do what you got to do.
I mean, you don't have to
do it with
a
good conscience, or don't do it. Basically, is what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
You're free in Christ. Just consider whether you're promoting sin or not by doing it. And P.S. I condemn every church that divides people and segregates them based on whether they're vaccinated or not.
Did you? Oh, you saw that. I mean,
That's
Rome's
satanic.
doing that. Vaccinated on this side, unvaccinated on
Jesus
this side.
touched lepers. Okay? Jesus touched lepers. So if you're segregating your church, you're reinstituting Jim Crow laws. You're sinning against God. Repent.
Jim Crow or Jim Eagle?
Yeah. Well, no, Jim Eagle, right?
I don't even know.
I'm talking
Jim
about
Eagle.
the past.
Was that a joke?
Yeah. I don't know. No, it's disgusting. It's morally repugnant to me that you would segregate your congregation based on vaccinations.
Yeah. Because what else are you going to do it on, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. That's where it starts. Where does it end then?
And that'll be something else next.
Yeah. Go watch To Kill a Mockingbird. Go watch that movie as a physical representation of segregation and Jim Crow laws, because all the black people got to sit up in the choir loft and all the white people get to sit on the main floor. Right. And that's exactly what you're doing by segregating based on vaccine or not. Because that's what's going to end up happening. Everyone who's unvaccinated, you got to sit in the cheap seats upstairs. Go up the choir loft so you don't breathe on us. And by the way,
I mean, you're welcome to.
Well, you can commune last after everyone else vaccinated is communed.
Oh, we could read about that in 1 Corinthians as well.
We could, which is weird because if you're vaccinated, how can I get you sick by being unvaccinated?
Well, either the vaccine doesn't work or you don't even understand what you're saying.
What? Yeah. There's that conversation too, folks.
They don't even know what they're doing. Yeah, that's true.
They do not know what they're doing. Father, forgive them.
I'm going to end the broadcast now.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for hanging out. Have a good time. We'll see you next week. Peace.